Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Josh Hennick filling in for Mike Hill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN FM. Football at 4. Yes, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. The latest edition of the pod dropped this morning. Latest on Eagles training camp with Adam Capel and Jeff Mosher. And today, joining us, covers the Eagles, the NFL draft for InsideTheBirds.com. It is Andrew DiCecco, as every team is in camp, and that means let the speculation fly, because we still have a month to the actual game starting. Andrew DiCecco joins us now for Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Pretty good. So here's where I want to start with you, because obviously, in football world, quarterback is a hot topic. So I want to just put it on the tee for you, and you run with it, and that is this. What is a realistic expectation for Jalen Hurts' development in year 2 in this Sirianni offense?
Well, I mean, I think that he's going to have a lot more responsibility this year. You know, it's been lost in the whole offseason that he spent some time working with Tom House, a renowned quarterback coach who's worked with Tom Brady and many others. Jalen put in the work in the offseason. Now we need to see if he's able to refine some of his skill set now that he's had a full season in the system and continuity within the coaching staff. Obviously, the verbiage is going to be the same, but there's going to be a lot of differences as far as what he's going to be asked to do. I think now that I thought that now is when you're really going to see them take the training wheels off, and I want to see if he's able to make those tough throws in the tight windows, be able to develop that rapport with his receivers, be able to see the entire field, not be so quick to bail from the pocket, and just become more aware of what's going on around him, right? I mean, I think that as a young quarterback, sometimes I think that he saw pressure that probably wasn't even there, and actually many times it wasn't there, and he was very quick to sort of utilize his legs to get outside the pocket and create yards. And that way, rather than hanging in there, driving on the football and delivering it to an open receiver. So there's so many different things that I think that you're going to see a lot of difference in his game this year. And now I want to see if he's able to, obviously you need to see if he's good enough to make those adjustments, and time's going to tell. But I mean, early indications are that you're starting to see a lot of different improvements in Jalen as far as mechanics and things of that nature.
Now, based on what you said, how much of the growth of Jalen Hurts from last year to this year is a reflection of just a normal quarterback's development and growth, and how much of it is part of what his real potential is? Because I know there's a difference between, everyone gets a little better from year to year, right? It's football. These are professional athletes. They're working all off season long. But how much of also is this a reflection of Jalen Hurts growing into his ultimate potential?
Yeah, listen, and I've said this last season, he's a young quarterback finding his footing as a starting quarterback in the National Football League. I think that a lot of times you're so used to seeing these quarterbacks like Pat Mahomes and so on that have this instantaneous success, or they're the depiction of what many envision or think that a franchise quarterback should look like, when in fact it really does take time for everything to come together. Every player sort of develops at their own pace. And I think you saw the second half of last season, Jalen Hurts become a little bit more comfortable within the offense, and his mechanics got a little sharper. And I think a lot of that had to do with him really being able to dial things in and become more comfortable within the system and what's being asked of him and the coaching staff that surrounded him. And I think that he's a classic case of a young quarterback that just takes a little bit of time for things to come together. And, I really am going to be hyper-focused on what he's able to do in training camp and in the preseason in terms of, working through progressions and putting the football in position where the receivers can make a play after the catch. and seeing the entirety of the field. I mean, there was a lot of plays last season that he left on the field as far as open receivers. Sometimes they were touchdowns that he left, and the offense had to punt. And I think that comes with just maturity and reps and just being able to trust in your offensive line and the players that you have out there. And I think that's you're going to see a vastly improved Jalen Hurts this season. I truly do believe that.
Now, when you say vastly improved, what do you believe would be a symbol of that? Are we talking about, just more touchdowns? Are we talking about a better completion percentage? Are you saying the Eagles win one or two more games? Because, a lot of fans out there, they're trying to wrap their head around what is a realistic expectation when A.J. Brown and Nick Sirianni and all these people are saying, Jalen Hurts has made improvements. Well, what is something you think is a tangible measure of that?
Extending drives, finishing drives off with a touchdown instead of a field goal, not leaving plays on the field, which happened too often last season. I think just maximizing the weapons that you have to the fullest potential. I think that they have the potential to be a very high-octane passing offense, and there's no excuses for Jalen this year. I think he needs to be able to find a way to incorporate all the pieces in there and find a way to really manufacture touchdowns instead of punting the ball, not seeing guys, erratic passes. And I think that if you look at that as a barometer I look at that as a barometer for success, just being able to be more consistent and have the offense have some more of a semblance of a rhythm to it.
Andrew DiCecco writes for InsideTheBirds.com, joining us here on Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, Andrew, a couple other things we're watching in training camp. We know who the two outside receivers are going to be. We know it's going to be A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. But a lot of people want to know, where does that leave Zac Pascal, Quez Watkins? Does Jalen Reagor even make this team? What are your thoughts on the receivers not named Brown and Smith?
Well, to me, I think Quez Watkins is the clear-cut number 3. I think he has a chance to be even better than he was last season. I think you're going to see a lot more explosive plays. He may even be able to thrive as a vertical slot this season with people being so hyper-focused on Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. I think you're going to see Quez have a lot more real estate to work and a lot more explosive plays coming in his direction. So I like what he brings from a skill set standpoint to complement what they already have. Then when you look at Zac Pascal, I think he slots in quite nicely as a number 4. I think he's going to be a situational player that's going to factor into the red zone and blocker and to have. So I think that he's going to have his role, but it's not going to be as large as maybe it was when he was pressed into duty with the Colts. And then where does that leave Jalen Reagor? I think Jalen Reagor becomes the 5th by default and a punt returner if he's able to seize that role.
So let's say Reagor does seize that role. Because, every Eagle fan, they hate him. They should have drafted Jefferson, all that kind of stuff. So what would be in your mind if Jalen Reagor makes this team and he's your primary punt returner and he's your number 5 receiver? What is in a good year for Reagor compared to what he's done in the past? I
think being able to make plays on the ball is in your direction. I mean, you look at the Giants game last season, he had opportunities to really emerge as a hero from that game, and it was right in his hands, and that certainly didn't help his narrative at all. I mean, I think being able to make the plays when they're there, you have to capitalize on that. I also think a couple explosive plays here and there, if you have a little bit more creative play calling, get him the ball in space, I think that's going to work wonders for his confidence and how he's viewed from the fan base. Do I think he's going to have a big role? No, but I think that he can be a contributing piece to the offense if he's used properly and if he can get out of his own way, right? I think sometimes it's a confidence thing. I think he gets in his own head a little bit there, and I think it's sort of like a give and take type of thing with Jalen, and I think that now there's not really a whole lot of pressure on him because you have the clear-cut 1, 2, and arguably a third receiver. Now he's able to really work on whatever it is that he feels he needs to work on as a receiver, which depending on who you ask, is a multitude of things. But I think he can sort of play a little bit more free and let his natural athleticism take over. Now, are the Eagles going to be happy with a first-round investment being the fifth receiver? I highly doubt that. But I think they would take any return of investment at this point in his career. And he could also be, depending on how far he tumbles down the depth chart, Josh, he could also be a viable candidate to be traded if there's a proper market for him. I could easily see a player-for-player deal, maybe a player on another team that hasn't worked out, or someone who's buried on a pretty stacked depth chart in exchange for Jalen Reagor for just a change of scenery.
Andrews, flip it over to the defense. There's a couple of position battles I'm very intrigued by. The first one I want to ask you about is linebacker. They signed Kazir White. They drafted Nakobe Dean. Davion Taylor's coming off an injury. TJ Edwards was arguably, if not the best, one of their best linebackers all of last year. How do you see these position battles shaking out, and what are your keys you're watching for?
Yeah, I think Kazir White was selected with a reason, with the purpose of being a starting linebacker on this team. And I think ultimately you're going to see, probably in the early goings, you're going to see TJ Edwards and Kazir White. And I think ultimately you're going to see TJ Edwards supplanted by Nakobe Dean just based on athleticism and sheer talent. I think TJ Edwards has a role in this football team. In fact, I'm certain he does. But he's a very one-dimensional player, and I give him all the credit in the world for making the most out of his skill set and refining a lot of areas of his game. But he's not going to become a better athlete, right? I think that he's their most proficient rundown linebacker, and he's going to have a role, and he sets the tone, and he's a tackling machine and all those good things. But I think when you look at the way the NFL is trending, you really need to have your best athletes out there. I think if the Eagles had it their way, it would be Davion Taylor and Nakobe Dean by the midway point in the season. But there's too many question marks with Davion Taylor. I think that he can be an adequate third linebacker and step in there because he's really had a history of injuries, which is unfortunate because he started to emerge last season. But I do think that Kazir White is coming off his best season with the Chargers last year, and I think that they obviously identified him as being a player that they can step right in and help. And then I think that Nakobe Dean, just based on talent alone and his blitzing proficiency and just his football intelligence, it lends itself to him being inserted into the lineup a little bit earlier than a third-round rookie might ordinarily be. So I think that's how it's going to ultimately shake out. And, the linebacking core is completely revamped, and I think it's for the better. I think you have a lot of different guys that have these different skill sets that all complement one another. Now it's about, that's great to have on paper, but now it needs to translate on the football field. So, but they have done enough, in my opinion, to really augment that linebacking core, which has really just been a sore spot perpetually. So now it just needs to see how all these pieces come together to make a formidable second level.
Most people know Nakobe Dean because he was on the national championship team at Georgia. What is something that you want people to know about Nakobe Dean, the linebacker for the Eagles, though?
He's just a sharp football player that with sideline to sideline range, and he's going to be a three-down linebacker for this football team. And I think he's going to pick things up and become a starter and a presence on that defense and a leader on that defense early on in his career. He's that good of a player and arguably one of the steals of the draft. And he's going to make that second level infinitely better. And I think it's only a matter of time before he takes over. I do think it's going to be sooner than later.
Andrew Sliff shifts into the secondary. We all know it's Bradbury and Slay on the outside. We all assume it's Avonte Maddox, I should say. Not Asante, Avonte Maddox in the slot. But what about the safeties? What are your thoughts on Tart, Harris, Epps, Wallace? There's basically only going to be two safeties on the field, but there's potentially four guys competing for two spots.
Yeah, well, let's get Wallace out of the way first. He's a player that I mentioned on this show over the past few seasons. Is someone that, when he was coming out of Clemson, I never was allured by the name, by the school Clemson, and is knowing that he played safety. Obviously, he's always going to draw parallels to one Brian Dawkins, but C.J. Gaddis has been there before too, and he didn't pan out either. But Kayvon Wallace is a one-dimensional player that has had opportunities to really step up and carve out a larger role on defense, but injuries have hampered him, and his limitations have shown. He's more of a box type of player, not a post safety, doesn't have that fluidity or range to his game. He's best suited right now to be a number 4 and a special team standout if he's able to do that. Remember, Andre Stacheret is there as well, and I think that he's a multifaceted defensive back that's arguably one of the best special teams players in the NFL. So I don't know how. I think Kayvon Wallace, I wouldn't pencil him in for a roster spot. He still has to go out there and earn it. Now, Marcus Epps is a player that I do believe will be a starter for this team this season, and very smart player. He makes up for his lack of athleticism with football intellect, tenacity. He knows where to be. He flows to the football. He's tough. He's fearless. And it really says a lot that 2 different defensive coordinators, and Jim Schwartz and Jonathan Gannon now, have put a lot on his plate and have given him a lot of responsibility and trust. And I think that really shows that they believe in him to carry out his responsibilities at a high level, at least in their eyes, which is what's most important. But as far as the interesting one for me is Harris versus Jaquiski Tartt. And when I look at that, I mean, yes, Harris initially, I would say I thought that Harris had the upper hand and the advantage because he's coming with a background in Gannon's system, and he's slightly young. I mean, he's not much there, but I look at his experience within the system and how that would maybe be a little bit more of a gradual process for Tartt to catch up, whereas Harris already has that knowledge. But Tartt is the better player. Now, he's also struggled with injuries in his career, but I think when you look at in terms of athleticism, and he can be that back-end enforcer, which they really don't have and they need. That's him. He's a big hitter, tone setter type of guy. A little bit more. He runs a little bit better, covers a little bit more ground than Harris. I think Harris is a little bit one-dimensional in this part of his career. He doesn't have the lateral agility or the speed that can be a post player effectively or consistently. So I think Tartt will probably ultimately win that over, and I think that his veteran experience is ultimately going to help him catch up and learn the system pretty quickly. And then I think you're going to see it materialize before our eyes in the preseason. I think he's kind of going to supplant Anthony Harris there. And I think Harris is certainly going to have a role. I just don't know how, to what extent. But I think you're going to probably see Tartt and Marcus Epps as your safeties, starting safeties.
Andrew, one more before I let you go. I want to ask you about Brandon Graham coming off the injury. Everyone who's seen him says he looks great. He himself says that his recovery from the Achilles has been a lot better than the recovery from the knee. So what is a realistic, fair expectation for Brandon Graham coming into this year, into a defense that is very different than what Jim Schwartz was running a couple of years ago?
Well, Brandon Graham is a pro's pro. He's a smart guy. He gives everything he's got. I think you're going to see the same Brandon Graham that you've always seen from what I've gathered. He's moving around pretty well. He's made a remarkable recovery as far as, coming off an Achilles at that age is pretty remarkable. So I think you might see a little bit of a slow start to the season, not the usual explosive Brandon Graham that we're accustomed to seeing. But I think, by and large, Josh, you're going to get the same Brandon Graham that you've always got. And, it might not be double-digit sacks, but I think he's going to step up as a leader on this defense and amid a host of players that are coming in from different systems and different backgrounds. I think you're going to see Brandon Graham step up and really lead the charge there and be the player that we've always known him to be. Now, I don't know that he's going to reach the double-digit sacks, like I said, but I think he's going to be a productive player for this defense.
Andrew DiCecco at DiCecco NFL on Twitter. Check out all of his coverage of the Eagles over at InsideTheBirds.com. And he joined us today for Football at 4. Andrew, enjoy the rest of your day and stay cool. It's still hot outside.
Yeah, man, you too.